this little tiny clay owl in my art studio that holds all my Arteza brushes. This was not created by me, but actually a child from a job that I had many moons ago working in an art school. And although it's slightly broken, which is why I presume the child didn't want it and left it there for many years, I claimed it because I thought it was absolutely perfect. For me, this owl is sweet, bright, innocent, and although that little eyebrow is broken, it feels more alive. It feels more sincere. It feels as if this little curious owl is watching me paint. Hi creatives, my name is Lauren Elizabeth with Lauren Elizabeth Animal Art. I'm a certified art therapy practitioner and an independent pet and wildlife artist. Today I'm going to help you embrace the broken, the flawed, the messy. This is something I've really been exploring in a new collection I've been working on called Transformed by Hope, exploring themes of transformation, resilience, and personal growth. So to welcome in the spring in this art therapy-based pony tutorial, we're gonna learn to balance skill and technique with spontaneous, expressive creativity. But before we begin, if you had to name this little sweet owl, what would you call it? Comment down below with the name and let's get started. All right, creatives, so if you'd like to paint along and reap all the benefits of this art therapy-based therapeutic tutorial, I have a link down below to the reference, which will not be on the screen, the traceable outline and instructions on how to use that, the technique guide, a list of materials, brushes, and more. I'm adding grass green, viridian is the color above it, and sky blue. And another favorite, phthalo blue. And because I want to add a bit of texture, I really want to get playful with texture here, I'm going to add some white paint. So I'm going to add I'm going to make all different types of greens with some blues in the background. I'm going to mix up my grass green with, I'll pull in some viridian and some white. So that's grass green, viridian, and white. We are missing one color, a color that makes green so beautiful, like a lime green, and that's cabin yellow. So I'm going to mix up some of this. So that's grass green, viridian, and white. And I want you to just, actually you can mix the ones I'm mixing, but also mix up any beautiful colors that you feel led to mix up, that you like. I'm going to pick up some of that. So I picked up some of our mixture of viridian and grass green and white, and now I'm going to add some yellow to it and a bit more white. So next I'm going to pick up some white and we'll do something, and it's okay if there's some previous color. Again, we're going to just be playful with color here. I'm going to pull some viridian with some sky blue. And we're going to let things mix on our canvas too. Ooh, what a lovely color. I like that one. I'm going to add more white. So if you notice, I'm making a lot of pastel colors. Everything I'm mixing up has quite a bit of white to it. And that's just going to give us those spring, bright pastel colors. So next, what I'm going to do, taking some of that color, I'm going to pull in some phthalo cyan blue in it. This gets a little bit darker. I'll add a bit of white, a bit more white to it. So in the next step, what we'll be doing with our palette knife, our paint, and our brushes is getting curious about the kind of shapes, the kind of lines, the kind of textures, the colors that mix on our canvas. It's gonna feel weird. It may look weird, but when you feel that urge to fix and to make perfect, resist the temptation as best you can and tell yourself, I'm gonna let this be and let it go.
Next color, I'll pick white. I have some of this color on there and cadmium yellow. So blue and yellow make green. We're kind of mixing up our own neat green right now. So I'll add more cadmium yellow and I'll actually add more sky blue.
Now this is also what I call an open-ended tutorial. So whatever colors you feel led to mix, mix them. If you feel inspired to add moths or birds in the background, do that. Do what you feel your creativity is nudging you to do.
And let's mix up a dark green. We don't have a dark green. I'm gonna just pull in grass green and some cadmium yellow, but more grass green than cadmium yellow.
Now comment down below the color that comes to your mind when you think of spring. For me, I think of green, lush, grass, flowers, life. But what about you?
So I like to grab my size 10 angle brush to cover up the white, and I'm using a sided canvas, so we'll also cover the sides. And then we'll play with our palette knife. So I'm gonna make sure my brush is clean and damp.
You ready to make a beautiful mess? We're gonna explore these colors, creating any shape that comes to mind, blending them, splattering them, leaving bumpy, beautiful texture on there. Anything could happen, and try to stay open to it.
I'm gonna start with the blue. We have some oranges that we're gonna pull out in the pony, so that's why I'm gonna start with the blue. And we wanna get as close to that sketch as possible, if not over top, just so we don't have little white specks left over. So here's how we're gonna make these shapely brush strokes. I picked up some of this beautiful sky blue and viridian mixture. And then I'll go straight into this light green. I'll add some down here. So that's kind of the idea. I'm leaving beautiful shapes, colors unblended, but there's still some blending going on. So that's kind of how they get connected. I'll pick up some of the dark green, mix that with the lighter green. Then to our blue again. And notice my brush, I'm holding it like that just so I don't pull off too much paint. If you don't like the color, you can let it dry, add a different color to replace it.
So no need to keep that eyelash. We'll paint over both eyelashes. And once this background is dry, we'll paint it back in.
I'll even wipe some of this paint off so I don't have as much, but I still have a little bit. I'll go into this green that we haven't, the one that we mixed up with our blue and yellow.
So I like to have a theme that we follow for every painting tutorial. And the theme for this one is surrender. So right now, as you're painting, I'd like you to reflect on what that means to you. What does it mean to surrender?
See how some beautiful blues just kind of revealed itself there? What if you just went around with the color and just added some shapes? I'm getting a little too dark, but I see some little hints of yellow. So here's what I'm gonna do. I love that yellow-green. I'm gonna pick up a smaller brush actually.
This is my size 1 Arteza round brush.
A mixture of white and yellow with a little bit of that green we were just using.
So anywhere that I love the interesting yellow that I've already added to my canvas, I'm gonna pull that out even more.
I love these shapes that are left here. I want to add a bit lighter green right here, little dabs. There, I like that.
All right, so I'm gonna wash my brush off and go back to our size 10 Arteza angle brush.
I'll go back to a light blue just because I want to get the value a little lighter. Back and forth from dark and light.
Another way to add interest is by adding contrast, so alternating dark and light shapes.
I picked up more of this green right here. It's like a mossy green kind of. And I'm laying it on pretty thick. I'll go to this first green we made. I really do love that green. That's probably my favorite green here. The first one we mixed up. I'm going to cover up the hair, this cute little pony's hair. We're going to paint over it with our lines. You can even leave space of the canvas that you plan to paint into a shape, if you want to do it that way. I'll go straight into our darker blue. Oh, that's pretty big chunk. I don't want that much texture. Go back to the lighter green. I use the point of my brush just to create a shape in that white dot that I left. You can turn your brush and use that point of the angle brush. Maybe you want to outline a shape. Whoops, that just splattered. It's kind of cool though. Maybe you want to do a splatter when all this is dry. Would that be fun if we could do like a little splatter of paint? Ooh, I barely touched my dark green. I'm going to go to my dark green for down here. And because I want to start getting into some of these small areas while also creating shapes, I'm going to go back to my size 1 round brush. I'll go to our light blue for right here around the eye. Covering up those eyelashes again, just like we did on the right.
All right, so as you continue working on your background, playing with color, let's take 5 deep breaths in through our nose and then a very long exhale out through the mouth. Now, the other thing I'd like to encourage you to do as you're creating is take notice to how you're feeling. Take notice to when you're holding your breath, when you're feeling tense. What sensations are you feeling in your hands as you're painting? What thoughts come up as you're painting lines, unique organic shapes, or when you're using the color blue or yellow? Just like you would notice a new freckle on your hand or notice your shadow, take notice to the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, and sensations taking place as we're creating.
I'm going to pick up more of my yellow and start adding some more yellow. I'll add more white and more yellow to that, just to draw out those yellows even more.
So for the next steps, I'm going to be using my palette knife to create unique designs and shapes in the paint. So we want to work while the paint is still wet. Unless you don't have a palette knife, you could also use the back of your brush or some sort of sharp tool.
All right, now if you feel led, what you can do while this paint is still wet is you can start creating beautiful little designs in the wet paint with the point of a palette knife. You can add paint, or you can just cut into it. So adding paint is just pretty simple. You pick up some paint on the bottom of it, and then you can just squish it down, create any shape you want.
I'm going to play again with paint using my size 1 Arteza round brush, going to the light blue to draw out some of those shapes we just made with our palette knife. Now, if you're wondering why I've left out the sides, not really intentional, but I will be painting the sides as well, because it's also part of the painting. Now, another technique is I'm going to use what I call my pizza flipper palette knife. It kind of looks like one. I'm going to scrape off some of the paint, take off some of the texture, place it in another spot. If you like that look, it actually shows the texture of the canvas and thins out that area. But if you don't like it, at least try it. But if you don't like it, you can just go right back with your paint and paint over it. I'm going in with our medium blue to do that. So I'm grabbing my size 5 Arteza angle brush and I'm going to start painting the sides. Now, there's no rush here. Take your time if you're still working on your background, but we are coming close to the end of working on our beautiful mess here. If you haven't painted your sides, paint those in. If you have little white specks on your canvas that you don't want, paint those in, unless you do want them. And then we'll let the canvas dry for a good long time because you likely have a bit more paint than normal on your canvas, and we want that to be dried before painting the pony. Hi creatives, sorry to interrupt, but if you're currently struggling with things like anxiety, depression, trauma, grief, addiction, art, and especially animal art can be an enormously helpful tool through the healing, through recovery. So for those of you that don't know my story, real quick, after experiencing domestic violence, I turned to addiction for many, many years. And once I got to rock bottom, I ended up walking into the church and getting free group therapy there and meeting my first friend and accountability partner who's still a friend today. But around that same time, my desire for the first time in 10 years came back to create art, animal art. So while I fed my mind with things like sermons, painting tutorials, TED Talks, I was also growing my skills and confidence in animal art. So God turned my pain into my purpose. So if you need a creative, healthier outlet, just like I use that was a part of my healing journey, I want to invite you to my Masterclass Bundle, which is now available. Here, you can learn to build skills and confidence in acrylic, drawing, and painting while reducing stress, anxiety, and expressing it all out in a creative way. So I have links to that down below. It includes my 12-step pet portrait painting process. If you're interested in accepting pet portrait commissions, I also have included my pet portrait commission course in there. I've included my master animal fur course and my creative color course, so you can learn all my color methods. Guys, if that would interest you or a friend in need, the links are down below. Let's get back to it. All right, so I have a fresh, clean paint palette and paper towel and water. I let my canvas dry for about 10 minutes, and now I've applied yellow ochre to my paint palette, and now violet.
Burnt sienna, a color I don't use that often, but burnt sienna, raw sienna, orange, and white and black. And this is my golden brand white. I'm going to start with my size 1 round brush. And we're just going to fill in those eyes and work around them with a gray. So that's black and white. And if you have a lot of texture on your canvas and it's still a little damp, just be careful. Sometimes I'll use this hand to prop the other hand that I'm painting with on. So I'm using this dark gray to fill in both eyes. And I even feel more comfortable switching brushes. So this is my 3-back/0 round brush.
So we're moving on to the pony and still relying on creative intuition and leaning into that, but a little bit more on skill and technique. But don't worry, I'll walk you through step by step, one small body part at a time.
There's just a little bit of white for where the eyelash will lay.
Now, throughout this tutorial, I'll be talking a lot about color value. It's how light or how dark a color like orange, blue, black, yellow is, and I'll adjust it using white or a darker value. You're likely not going to mix up the exact same color or value as me. That's what's going to make our painting so unique and different. That's okay. Just try and get it close enough to a dark or a medium or a light value. So working around the eye now, that left eye we're going to work on first. I'm going to mix up a dark gray that's a bit lighter than the dark gray we just applied to the eyes. Now this is definitely where you're going to have to refer back to the reference photo in the tutorial bundle. This is important as we're working on one body part at a time. We're getting more realistic with this pony compared to our background. Now I'm leaving some white of the canvas below that left eye where I made that strip, and I'm attaching it to the far end of that eye. Next, I'm going to pull in some of that dark gray that we just used, add some raw sienna to it in a separate pile, and use that to outline the area above the left eye. On the end of that, next to that marking on the horse's forehead, I'm going to create an open C. Now into that pile we just mixed, I'm going to add in more white and more raw sienna so that we can fill the top eyelid in. Now right above that line we made, I'll keep working with this color, and then I'll add in more of our dark gray and a bit more raw sienna as we move to the bottom of this eye. So you see I'm using raw sienna and or black to darken up the value, or to lighten it up, I'm using white. With that color still on my brush, I'm going to work on the indent below this left eye and connect it to the bottom of that open C. I'm going to wash off my brush so we can mix up our next color. I'm going to mix up yellow ochre, raw sienna, and white. This is a medium value we're mixing up. The white on the lower part of the eye, above this brown shape that we made, I'm going to fill this in. Now, because of that light source hitting this part of the eye, it's getting lighter on the far left, but darker here, which is why I pulled in some of our brown black mixture, which I will continue using up that eye along the side of the marking. Now that didn't quite darken it up enough, and so I'm going to mix up a dark gray, so white with black, and while that paint is still wet, I'm going to blend it directly on my canvas to darken it up. Now I want to carefully darken up the line above the left eye, and just ever so carefully below the left eye. I washed off my brush, and now I'm mixing up a light gray. So into the corner of that gray, I'm adding lots of white. This is a very thin line, so keep that hand steady as best you can. It's going to be a lighter gray on the outside of the eye, and as we move in closer to the inside of the eye, I'll pull in more of that gray. So next we're going to be painting that beautiful long eyelash. We're going to mix up black with raw sienna, but do a little test with your hand. See if that area is dried. We definitely don't want to be pulling any greens or blues in there. But if it is, I'm actually adding also some white in there. So that's raw sienna, black, and a bit of white. Test it out because you want it to be dark enough over top of your background. So if that area is a dark blue, you might actually need to add white to this color so it stands out. Or if it's a very light color like mine, add more black or raw sienna. And I'm just doing these lines that come out from the side of that eye. Now I'm literally slowing down the footage here just so I don't go too fast. And if I do, be sure to use the pause or play button on your screen. There's no rush here. But I'm going to do the exact same thing on the right eye as we did on the left. You ready? So make sure your brush is clean and damp. We're going to go in with our mix of brown with the black and the raw sienna with a tiny bit of white. I'll use this color to outline the top part of the eye, the upper eyelid, and also work the bottom, leaving that tiny little bit of white outline beneath the eye. We're a little out of order here compared to the left eye, but very similar steps. By the way, if this is helpful, if this has brought you some joy, some relaxation, some peace, be sure to like and subscribe if you're not already, and or comment down below with feedback if there's another animal I could paint, if there's something that you're confused about that you need help with, maybe something that will help me improve for the next tutorial. Please leave it down below. I read every comment. So just like we did to the left eye, I'm going to attach that strip to the far left of this right eye. So I'm going to wash off my brush because I want to mix up more of our raw sienna and black mixture, keeping it dark, but not as dark as the dark gray we used for the eye. I want to work this along that traceable line below the right eye, and then I'll work it up along the side of the eye a little bit more than we did on the left. Next, I'm going to wash off my brush and move to our mixture. You may need to mix up some more, but it was our mixture of raw sienna and yellow ochre and white. And we're going to use that to fill in the white gap below the right eye. Next color is raw sienna and white. That's raw sienna and white, and that's what I'll use to paint now the top of the eye. Now I want to smooth that out and darken up some areas, so I'm going into our raw sienna black with a bit of white mixture. Excellent. So next we're going to work above both eyes with the color black, white, and raw sienna. This is black, white, and raw sienna, and notice how I'm adding a lot more white because I want to make this a medium value. Not too dark, also not too light, right there in the middle. Now you'll see real quick, to smooth that out and lighten it up, I pull in some of the raw sienna and yellow ochre and white mixture. I pick that up, mix that in with some of the dark brown black that was on my brush, and on both eyes, I lighten this area up. Now, pausing to look at both eyes right now and make sure they're symmetrical, I notice that the outline below the right eye is very thick. I need to thin it out a little bit, so that's why I went in with my dark gray. Next, I'm going to mix up a light gray with a little bit of black, lots of white, to then fill in that white outline beneath the right eye. Now, no animal, no creature, no human has perfectly symmetrical eyes. There's going to be some flaws, some imbalance, but try your best to keep the outline below both eyes about the same width, length, a little bit about the same curve, and the other parts relatively similar. So next, I'm going to mix up black with raw sienna, but making this a very dark brown. And painting back in those eyelashes with about the same angle as the left eye, I'm going to extend that out over top the background. Now here's the tricky part, and I touched on it a little bit when we painted that left eye. But if you have too many dark values behind these dark value eyelashes, they're not going to stand out very much. They're going to kind of blend into the background. So what you want is either lighter eyelashes by adding more white to the brown, make it like a grayish brown, or you want to have the background lighter. So I'm going to do that now. I'm pulling out some of my Viridian and my sky blue, and just carefully around the eyes. We don't have to paint the whole area because we've kind of made a very loose abstract background. We can just work around it to make that face come forward. And here's the other thing I'm doing. Not only, well, you see me painting around that right eye eyelash, but also getting the slight curve above the indent that we painted in above both eyes. Above those upper eyelids, there's a slight curve, and so I cut in a little bit there into the pony. But now I'm noticing that those areas above both eyes is just a little on the dark side. So before that dries, I'm going to mix up a light yellow. I'm going to add a little bit of raw sienna to this, but it's mostly yellow ochre and white. So that's a little bit of raw sienna, yellow ochre, and lots of white. And we'll highlight above both eyes. And just a touch or two below both eyes. Excellent. So those eyes are not fully done, but mostly we're going to move on to the nose so we can make sure we cover up the white and then get even more colorful. So for the nose, I'm going to work on the nostrils first with black and violet. Yep, we're going to use violet and black, very dark value, to fill in the nostrils. So you may want to watch me first just to see where I'm starting. I'm going to work along both lines for the nostrils, along both lines of our traceable. Now from there I'll work out, but you'll see on both sides I'll leave the tiniest, thinnest little line of our canvas on the outside. So I won't go all the way to that nose line on both sides. Now at the top of both nostrils, I'm going to create a little hook. It's a very short, thin little line, but they're going to be pointing towards one another at the top of both nostrils. Now we're missing pinks and reds. We often will see lots of pinks and reds around the snout of a horse, especially a young horse, a very young pony. So I'm going to put some fluorescent pink by Liquid-X and permanent red on my paint palette now. Little tip here, it's often not just all pink around the muzzle or the snout. We have pinks and browns very often. So I'm going to pull in raw sienna, fluorescent pink, permanent red, and white to create a medium brownish pink. Again, that's white, fluorescent pink, permanent red, and raw sienna. With this medium pinkish brown, I'm going to work between the nostrils just for a little bit, down around the lips, and then we'll add white to it as we move up on the top. So as I move up and even along the nostrils before it hits the black, I'm going to add more white to it and really lighten that up. So you see how I'm like separating now the dark nostrils from that medium pink we just added. But on that note, I actually want to be pulling from two different colors, even though I mixed them and they almost look like I mixed them into one. I want the medium brownish pink and the light brownish pink separate, because I want the darker version, the medium value brownish pink, to come down on this top lip. All right, you ready for our next color? I'm going to wash off my brush, mix up a medium gray again, and we're working pretty small here. We have lots of separate parts that we're going to eventually join on this mouth to try and get values right. So with this medium gray, leaving another white border, this time on the nostrils, below both, on the upper lip first. So I'm going to work on the upper lip area first. I'm going to add more white to that, just a little bit. And without covering up our traceable line for the mouth, I'm going to paint on the bottom lip now on the sides only. I'm going to wash off my brush because we're going to move to a different color. I'm actually going to be using orange and pinks now for that bottom lip to complement those beautiful blues now. So it's permanent red, fluorescent pink, raw sienna, and orange. I'll say that again. So it's orange, raw sienna, permanent red, and fluorescent pink, a very vivid reddish orange for that bottom lip. I'm going to mix up a dark gray next with lots of black and a little bit of white to create the line for the mouth. Very thin line. We don't want this to be too thick and bold. Now we're actually going to use that bit of gray that's on our brush, mix it into a corner of our orange pink red, add it to the bottom, but I'm going to blend it in to the bottom of that bottom lip. Next, I'm going to wash off my brush and mix up our next color. This is what we'll use to fill in the whole chin. It's a medium value of raw sienna and yellow ochre. Raw sienna and yellow ochre, just that little bit of chin we have to paint in. Now, before that bottom lip dries, I'm going to add the smallest bit on my brush of white paint, because this is fluid white. I don't want it dripping. I just want a small amount. And I'm going to highlight the center of the bottom lip. I don't want to cut into that dark gray or the bottom darker area, just the center of that orange, pink, brown lip. I'm adding more of a highlight to the right side because we're getting a little bit more sunshine there. Now here's another part where you might want to watch me before trying it yourself. I mixed up a very, very light gray, so a little bit of gray with lots of white. I highlighted the outline we left underneath the nostrils, but also on the bottom lip over top the grays, okay? On the bottom lip over top the grays, and I connected them to that highlight below the nostrils. Now to make things even more interesting, I'm adding more color with lots of white and a tiny bit of violet. Instead of carrying on with our gray up here on the top of the nostrils, we can trade it using a violet instead of the same value. So you might need to add more violet if it's not dark enough. You might need to add more white if it's too dark. So in terms of value, this definitely, to me, is more of a medium value. So next I'm going to add lots more white to our violet. And on both sides, coming up from this little hook that we made, I'm going to use lines to almost attach it, but not quite yet, to the marking above it. I'm going to switch over to a light gray, lots of white, just a little bit of black, and blend these values up. Now you'll notice I'm leaving a bit of white in between the pink and the violet because I want to grab almost white. It's light gray with just a tiny bit of violet on my brush left and lots more white. And I'm creating a shape that kind of looks like a downward facing arrow. But I won't spend much time there. We'll come back here. I'll jump right back to the bridge of the nose, working with our violet light gray. So it's just a little bit of violet in there with our light gray. Now to fill in the entire marking on the forehead would be ludicrous to use that tiny, tiny brush. So we're gonna mix with a size 5 Arteza angle brush. We're gonna mix our light gray with our light violet, okay? So if you need to mix up some more like I'm doing, that's white, a teensy weensy bit amount of black, and our violet. Now this only requires a little bit of violet because of how dominant and strongly bold violet is. So I'm just pulling in more violet to the center, especially because we're going to be doing those beautiful like spiral of hair over top this. So we want this more of a medium value than a dark value. Not too light, definitely not too dark. So hopefully you still have your light pink damp. If not, that's fluorescent pink with a tiny bit of raw sienna, permanent red, and white. Again, fluorescent pink, permanent red, raw sienna, and white. I'm going to lift up that light pink into some of that violet gray. Just a little bit goes a long way. We just want to make sure both sides of the nostrils that where we added the pink is about the same thickness. So I'm adding more white to our mixture of very light gray with violet. That's going to be very light value here on the bottom part around the muzzle where we have our marking. So I'm picking up my smaller palette knife and I'm going to make room on my paint palette so we can mix up some more colors. I'm going to pick up raw sienna and burnt sienna, okay, raw sienna and burnt sienna. I'm going to go straight into the next color with raw sienna and yellow ochre. That's raw sienna and yellow ochre. In a separate pile right above there, I'm going to take some of that color and add lots of white to that raw sienna and yellow ochre mixture with added white. Now you can use your palette knife to mix this up, or you can just grab the size 1 Arteza round brush like I am. I'm going to use some of that brown mixture that we started with, our darker brown, with black. So in a corner of it, I'm just mixing that. And so this is the dark brown I'll be using to paint the inside of the left ear. Now, as I'm doing this, very similar to what I did with both nostrils, I'm going to leave the very thinnest border on the left of this ear. So I'll work along that line, the traceable line, but then leave a little gap of white on the left side. So not pulling into this dark brown, I'm going to actually pull into the brown that we mixed from the very beginning, our burnt sienna with raw sienna. And I'm adding that to the bottom of the ear as well as the top of the ear going into that head. But to lighten that up, we're going to go in with our second mixture we mixed up. It's our yellow brown, and I'll add some of that in at the top. Next, I'm going to wash off this brush and actually set it aside, and we're going to move to our 2\0 liner brush, okay? I'm going to make sure it's clean and damp. We're going to go back to our yellow brown, and while the inner ear is still damp, we're going to create these subtle little inner ear hairs at an angle, and it should blend with the dark brown, so keeping it pretty subtle. Now this might not look like much now, but we're just going to angle clusters of lines on the inside. It's going to be blending with that dark brown, which is what we want. And then once this area dries, we'll go back and add another layer to just highlight the ends of those hairs that are sticking out. Because of that light hitting the horse from behind and a little bit from the side, we're only going to get a little bit of these hairs sticking out, getting some light. So I'm going to mix up a bit more of our dark brown. That's our brown mixture with added black, and I'll fill in the inside of the right ear. Now on this ear, we'll leave a white border, but different than the left. I'm going to leave a thicker border on the left of this right ear, and then paint over the entire right side of the ear, except for the very bottom that's getting hit with a little bit more light. I'll leave that white, but creating a little line where it separates the ear from the head. Did you miss that? I added a little line at the bottom of the ear, separating the ear from the head. Now to fill in those white gaps that we left on the right ear, I'm going to use a mixture of our brown, the first one we mixed up, with our yellow brown, a mix of the two, and I'll fill in both the bottom and the top of the left ear, doing some blending with some of those dark browns. Now once again, I'll set aside this brush, pick up my 2\0 liner brush with a mix of our brown and the light yellow brown, and use that on the inside of the ear to create those inner ear hairs that are at a slight angle and coming out from the middle of the ear. And while we're at it, let's use some of that to lighten up some of the inner ear hairs on the left ear, just to add another layer of color. So I'm going to wash my brush off, and next step is not something that you have to do. My hand brushed up against a textured part that pulled off some wet paint and smeared it. And instead of erasing it and covering it up, I'm going to emphasize it. So I'm going to make these little dots larger with my sky blue. So I'm going to grab my size 1 Arteza round brush, and for this next part, we're going to use a very relaxed, loose technique that still plays on color value. And we want to work at a steady pace where we can blend areas together. We're going to work on the right side of the pony's face first, and for a while, we're going to be kind of blending and placing. So I'm going to use a mix between our brown that we mixed up, our burnt sienna, raw sienna, with the added black, so the slightly darker value of this brown. So right along the right side of this marking, on the bridge of the nose, it's going to be slightly darker, not getting as much light as it is around the jawline on both sides. So we'll work up to the right of this eye and back down, and then move a little bit lighter. So I apologize for my colors kind of getting mixed up here. In a separate pile, I'm going to pull from the yellow brown and our first brown that we mixed with added white. And that's what I'm going to use now directly below the right eye. So I'll carefully work underneath that eye shadow and blend it up into those browns. Now that shadow underneath the lower eyelid looks just a little off, so I'm going to go back with our dark brown with the added black and just touch that up. Now I'm trying to shape around the bridge of the nose and around the muzzle, so bear with me as I leave some white specks here, but I'm using our yellow brown, but then I add some white to it to really highlight this, blending it up along that jawline. If you need to just give it a slight curve, but not too much, because this is a thin, sweet little pony very young. And then I'm going to go back to our browns that are darker around the white that I left around that marking. Now, I'm actually not going for a perfectly polished look here, so I'm just going in with a bit of the yellow-brown to add a bit of texture. Very subtle. Again, you don't need to obsess over details. We'll cover up the white and then we can go back to it if we need to, but also let things be imperfect. Next, I'm going to pull from our mix of the yellow-brown and the warm brown, working now above the right eye. I see a few white specks that I left here, and so I'm just touching that up with our black and warm brown mixture. And when I say warm brown mixture, I'm just referring to the first brown that we mixed up, the raw sienna with burnt sienna, which I'm going into again to blend now to the left of what we just applied, and that's right along that marking. Now I'm going for realism, but also abstract colors too are fun, and I'm pulling immediately into that, directly into that orange. And then pulling in some of our dark brown. Because of the hair that's standing up on the top of this pony's sweet little head, there's a shadow being created, so on the forehead, it's going to be pretty dark. So I want to mix up some more with raw sienna, burnt sienna into our orange mixture. And yes, that even does have a little bit of our yellow browns. It's going to get a bit lighter here on the left side. Now I'm going to recommend you mix up colors in separate piles instead of all into one like I'm doing. But that forehead just isn't dark enough, so I pulled a little bit of black into our brown mixture with the added orange and burnt sienna. But if you notice, I'm creating this bump, this slightly elevated upside down C on the forehead, and to the left and right of it is actually going to be a little lighter, just a smidge. But before I do that, with our orange browns, I'm going to raise it up a little bit on the left and then go straight into our yellow browns to add that slightly lighter value on the left and right of that bump. Now, without getting rid of that bump, I'm going to be blending this light value into the orange browns. Now, because I see little hints of lightness and almost looks like beautiful texture bumps, I'm going to add more of that with our light yellow brown. Again, I'm not trying to make this perfect. I want to make this interesting. All right, going back to our dark value, this is our orange browns with a little bit of added black. So this is a dark value that we're going to start working in front of that left eye. I'll work a little bit of this below the left eye. Now I'm going in with my yellow brown to fill in the rest of the white and blending that there above the left eye. Now, this might not be something that you're facing in your painting, but I have a little gap of white between our background and right where we painted. So after I wash off my brush thoroughly, I'm going to go back with a little bit of Viridian and Sky Blue and just touch that up. Then I have the littlest white that I left that I'm going to cover with our yellow brown with a little bit of our warm browns in there. Now, if you reference the image, you'll notice that there's a raised part above both eyes, and it creates a little bit of a bump, just like we have that structure on the forehead. So using a gray, this is a medium gray, I'm going to put back in those bumps above both eyes, making them symmetrical. But now we're missing some highlights there, and it took me a few tries to get this, so bear with me as I get the right value. But I end up mixing the yellow brown with added white, and that's what I use to highlight, again, above both eyes and along this bump. Switching brushes again, back to my 2\0 liner brush. So I added a subtle curve around that gray bump on the right, and I'm going to do the same on the left, but also adding more lightness to those highlights above both eyes. So if we're highlighting the eyelids and the area above it, we're definitely going to need to also highlight the eyelashes, just on the ends of them. Just a few dabs will do ya. This doesn't need to be super bold. So with another light value doing the same kind of thing, so this is white with our light yellow brown, I'm going to add a highlight to the bottom of both ears and along both sides of the head. Now this next part is so much fun. We're going to take that light yellow brown, add some along the markings along the muzzle. So this is layered over top very loosely, a very light violet gray on both sides and on the top of the nose, getting kissed by the sun. Can you almost feel the warmth from this painting? Just so lovely. And then we'll add that same light yellow brown along the bottom top part of the ears. Just another outline. So a very thin outline at the base of both ears, on both sides of both ears. And while we're here, just with a mix of our warm browns and the yellow brown, let's add another layer to those inner ear hairs. And again, I'm going to wash off that brush, set it aside, and do the swap again. Pick up my size 1 Arteza round brush, and we're going to pull in our burnt sienna, raw sienna, orange, and some of the yellow browns. I don't want this too dark and not too light, so a medium value is what we're shooting for, right below the left eye. And just like we did on the right side, it got lighter down at the bottom, along the jaw, which is why I pulled in more of the yellow brown. Now, do you notice? I really want to point out the light white outline I'm leaving on this left side of the face. And then I'm going to go even lighter at the bottom here, right before the nose, adding more white to our light yellow brown. So I'm blending down, and then soon I'm going to take this light value and place it along that outline that I've just left. Now with the little that I have left on this brush, as it blended with some of those warm browns, I barely touched the right side, and then I'm going to pick up my liner brush, go in with the light yellow brown, so that's the highlight that we were just putting at the bottom, and paint that over top the white outline that we left. So this white of the canvas that I left, I'm going to now paint down along the left side of the face. Now I'll use my fingers on this side to kind of soften it, but I'm going to do the exact same thing on the right side. If you watch me, I'm just going to create this subtle line, brush some of the paint off so it's not as bold, along the right side. This is why it's so nice to have this loose abstract background with all the colors, because it doesn't look out of place if I add some more vermilion and sky blue. With a mix of our yellow brown and the warm brown, I'm just gonna cover up some of that white that I left above the marking around the muzzle. Just a little bit that I didn't fill in. But immediately after that, I'm going to go in with our light yellow brown and highlight that, and then on the other side as well. This is actually not over top where the marking is, but right above it. So we're kind of elongating that snout a little bit. Moving right along and switching brushes as well to our size 1 Arteza round brush. I start out too light here, moving to the chest, or the neck neck and chest. I actually want this to be a bit darker. So that's the warm brown with a little bit of orange and some added black, working carefully around that mouth and under the chin, and pretty much the entire neck area, but not all the way to the left and right. We're going to get that a little bit lighter then, blending in our light yellow brown. Now we're gonna leave some negative space of the canvas yet again. I'm leaving the smallest little thin border around the nostrils and also below the jawline. Now here's the trick here. As I work up and I'm leaving that negative space, I want the values to be lighter here. So I'm going to start pulling in some of our yellow brown into this warmer, darker brown. But keeping that actually a darker value than the light value around the jawline. This is what's going to help create that dimension, keeping the face a little bit lighter in value than the neck and the area below it. I'm going to switch to my 2\0 liner brush with our light yellow brown, and this is what I'll use to fill in that negative space we left around the face and along the left and right sides of the neck, doing some blending on the neck into that warmer brown. Switching brushes again, my size 1 Arteza round brush, and we're really going to add in and blend that light yellow brown to the neck. Now be careful you don't bring in too much yellow in towards the center of the neck, and if you did, it's an easy fix with our mixture of burnt sienna, raw sienna, orange, and a bit of our yellow brown. So once you touch it up, we're going to then use that same color to start working to the left of the line on the back. So you see I left a gap. I'm working to the left of that line and on the other side as well. But once again, I'm going to jump to my light yellow brown. You might need to add some more white to it. And to close that gap on the far back, I'm blending that in with some of our warmer browns. Now my colors are getting a little mixed up, getting a little bit too brown, so I want to get them more yellow, so I mixed up white with our yellow ochre. And that's what I'll use on the right side now. So for this yellow that I'm adding, I'm really going to blend it into the warmer brown, but not getting rid of all that brown. Now you really want this last bit of white very light in value, lighter than the left side of the neck. So that's where we definitely want to add more white and or more yellow ochre, and we'll fill that gap in. I'm back with my liner brush to do some more yellow-brown highlights. Let's play with lines right now, on the back first, and then on both sides of the neck. And we're actually not done with that yellow-brown yet. I'm actually going to touch up some of the highlights around the eyes. And add a line highlight right here above that bump, above the left eye, connected to the ear base. And it's so subtle, so small, this might be something that you don't even need to add, but the eye on the right looks a little bigger than the one on the left, so I'm just going to thin it out just by cutting underneath the eyelash with a mix of the sky blue and the Viridian. Now I want to add just a little bit more form around the neck, just kind of where that Adam's apple is. So I'm going to mix raw sienna with black to create this smoky gray-brown, and I'm going to add it at the bottom of both sides of the neck, still in the center, but kind of working around that Adam's apple. Then adding the slightest little highlight within there for the throat, and that's a mix of our warm brown with our yellow brown. All right, so I love this part. We're gonna add fur texture to that marking, that white marking that we made grayish purple, and I'm gonna use a very light gray to do this with the liner brush. I think it's wisest to start in the center of the forehead and work around in that circle. So that's where I'm actually gonna work out of. So if you watch me, I'm just gonna create this spiral in the center of the head and then work lines out from there. You might have to adjust the gray. We don't want this straight white, but we do want a little bit of gray in there. So I'm adding a little bit more black. And notice how I'm curving my lines. This is somewhat coarse, curvy, but still short fur. So what we're going to do is work out from there clusters of lines, but now a row that just kind of spirals around the center. And as we do this, what we're also going to do is get rid of that hard edge around the marking. We actually want to have clusters of lines overlapping the brown fur. This is just a friendly reminder to breathe, to enjoy the repetition of these lines. And we're not aiming for perfection here. That's not the outcome we're aiming for. It's reflection, self-awareness, a release of what's going on inside of us. So make sure you wash off your brush if your lines are getting really thick or clumpy. And as we work down the bridge of the nose, the lines are actually going to get a bit shorter. Now, because the fur around the muzzle over the marking is so short, I actually begin doing clusters of lines, but I changed my mind. So if you keep watching for a little bit longer, you'll notice that I go over it with a flat layer with very little amount of paint on my brush. So not thick texture here, but trying to give the illusion of very thin fur that is exposing some of the skin. So here I go. I'm actually going to create a wash, adding water from my cup of water to this light gray and adding a thin layer on the top of the nose. Next, we're going to add more highlights of our yellow-brown, our light yellow-brown with our liner brush. I'll use this to both highlight more the jawline over top the brown yellow fur and add a bit more dimension up from there. So if you watch me, I'm going to go up, just add a bit more texture. We're not going for thick, bold lines here, so you might have to pull it off with your hand, but just emphasizing a long muzzle, the long snout, giving it a bit more form, even adding some highlights above there to the far left and right of the face. Now you're gonna love this. This is where we add that sweet little fluff of hair on the top of the pony's head. I'm gonna use our warm browns mixed with a lot more black, so it's a very dark brown. So these are very long, straight, but slightly curving strands. Start from the very center of the head and then just work up from there. And I do add a few shorter lines to the left and right of this hair. Excellent. Now your cup of water might be getting really mucky right now. You may want to replace it and then come back. I'm going to wash off my liner brush, pull some of our light yellow brown, and do some more highlighting. Now that we know where the hair starts and stops, I'm going to add more highlights over top the head to the left and right. And I'll also outline more of the ears. We can now work around the top of the ears with our light yellow brown. This is not all the way around the tippy top of both ears, but almost. So just outlining the border. All right, so the white of our canvas is completely covered, and now we're going to start fine-tuning and cleaning things up a bit around the face, adding a bit more detail. But again, while being open to the imperfections, the flaws, the mess. So with our light yellow brown, I'm going to add more highlights below and above the eyes. When I'm in this phase of pet portraits, animal paintings, I look for how I can add contrast. So adding more lightness to the areas that are getting hit by the light, or adding more darkness, or adding more medium values to help join the darks and the lights, which is what we'll be doing soon on the bumps above the eyes on the brown fur. Very carefully, I'm going to add more highlights in closer towards the inner eye with our lines over top the eyelashes. So for this next step, to add medium browns above the eyes, I'm going to switch to our size 1 Arteza round brush. I want to mix our warm browns, so that's a little bit of a yellow brown with raw sienna, burnt sienna, and some orange. This is what I'm going to use to go over some of the dark gray browns that we added. That's just a little too dark. So now I'll add some more raw sienna, burnt sienna, and orange to that to work around the marking now, being sure that I don't get rid of all that fur texture surrounding the border of the marking. Now right above those bumps on the eyes, I'm going to lighten up our yellow brown, blend that into some of the warm browns we just added. And very carefully, we haven't done this yet, the eyelid, the upper eyelid before those bumps, I'm going to add little dabs, little highlights that overlap some of the warm browns above both eyes. So if you watch me below and above both eyes, I'm going to add this light texture. It's not like I'm filling in. I'm barely applying much paint. I'm even pulling some off with my fingers, but just giving it that loose, abstract, but somewhat realistic texture that's indicating where that light is hitting. To richen up the beautiful orange browns on the body of the horse, I'm going to mix up some more. So that's orange, a little bit of burnt sienna there, raw sienna, plus our yellow browns. Just a few wisps of my brush to add yet another layer over top those areas. Now for this next part, again, I recommend you watch and learn and then give it a try yourself. I mixed up a dark gray and I'm going to add a bit more darkness to the left and right of the pink on the nose below the nostrils. More light applications, not bold lines, a subtle shadow that I'm adding below and on the bottom of the nostrils. And even cutting up along where that mouth line is. We're going to add more expression to that mouth. With this gray, to create a little bit more of a bumpy top lip, I'm going to just carefully cut into the center of it. Then we're going to add a highlight to the bottom lip. So we're going to remix our lip color with fluorescent pink, permanent red, raw sienna, don't forget that one, and white. I'm going to add the cutest little highlight, not a perfect straight line, but a broken one actually. And then I'll also add more highlights to the top of the nose. And that helped me remember to add a little bit more thickness and highlight with our light gray. And I'm not sure if this is actually the thickness of the nostrils or just the little bit of the marking along the muzzle that we see. Either way it works, and it's just a very thin line on both sides. Oh, our pony is coming to life, and even more so with this next step. I'm going to do violet and white and a bit of black to create this purple gray. It's more of a dark value, okay? And we're going to add that to the base inside both nostrils. So while we're adding this dark value, let's add a little bit more black to it to darken it up, and we'll darken the dark areas around the eyes. Just little dabs here. Remember, we're not filling in big areas. We're just adding more contrast. So on the outside, but facing the inside of the face, I'm going to add more of that V-shaped shadow there. This is over top the warm brown fur. Now, I actually don't think this next step is necessary, so you get to choose whether you want to add this or not. I'm going to add a darker value. This is a medium value pink, so I'm just mixing in more raw sienna and permanent red into the pinks we were just using for the lips. And I'm bringing up this brownish pink up on the nose. And that's when I noticed we actually need a bit more of a medium value around the neck and the back to get rid of such bold highlighted lines there. We want to connect it to the dark values with the medium value. So I'm going to mix in our warm brown with some other yellow brown, and right over the top that, just join those two areas together. Give them a hug, join them together so they're more connected. Now here's another optional step. I just actually think that the eyes aren't quite symmetrical in size, and I'm going to go in with just black and readjust that, bringing some of this black into that outline below the right eye. But what I did was I brought it out a little too much, and I have to touch that up with our blues and viridians. So make sure you step back and look at what your painting needs. We still have quite a few steps more to go, but so that you're not getting too caught up in details that can be left alone. But then sometimes mistakes can lead you to what it's missing, and that's what happens here. And that's when I move into the warm brown mixed with some other yellow browns, and just with a few dabs, I go in along where that marking is along the bridge of the nose and the area below it on the muzzle. I separate those areas with this light brown. That is what it needed. And then I add the lighter yellow brown along the jawline. You ready for this next part? This is where we add the peach fuzz coming out from both ears. Now I'm giving you lots of choices here, and I don't mean to confuse you, but I test this out, this one, and I don't end up liking it, but I do sit on it for a while. So this is your choice again. So you'll need your liner brush for this and the light yellow brown. Ever so carefully, we're going to add these short but slightly curving lines going up along both ears. And be very careful with your lines. We want to keep these nice and fine lines. Now this is only going to come out from the far left of the left ear and the far right of the right ear, that wider open end, but not on the other side towards where the forehead hair is. We're just going to re-outline that with more of this yellow brown. So again, a strong, bold outline, but still thin on the other side of both ears, the inside area, and at the bottom. Then what I think I could do is highlight the ends of all the strands, the hairs on the top of the pony's head. I tested this out, didn't like it. So I went back with my gray browns, painted over that. I say this in a lot of my tutorials. When in doubt, test it out, and if you don't like it, just paint over it. It's very forgiving acrylic paint, but you just never know unless you give it a try. Now you're ready to do that very same thing on the chin, adding that little peach fuzz. And no, I don't end up taking this out. I keep this So I outline the chin with our yellow brown. Add some more white if you need to, because this does need to be very light. And then very fine lines coming out from there. So I do make these lines relatively long and slightly curving and going in different directions. And for another layer of our highlights on the neck and on the back. So the color closest to how you're feeling right now, what color would that be? Would it be blue? Would it be purple? Dark blue? Pink? Light yellow? There's no right or wrong answer here. For me, I chose the color violet. This is a medium violet with white and violet, adding dabs of it to the head. And this feels like renewal. It feels like a boost of confidence. It feels like energy. That's why I chose this color. Adding splashes of spontaneous color like this honestly gives it more of a lively, playful feel. And so I will often do that around the middle to end when I paint my animal portraits. And if there's anything that you don't like, you can just paint right over it. That's what's so nice about acrylics. Now we'll actually be doing that again, but after this step. So I'm going to darken up the shadow beneath the hair with our mix of warm browns with added black. And here we go. Choose a second color that matches your state, how you're feeling mentally, emotionally, maybe even physically. I went with orange, which I'll be using on the lower part of the body and face, because I'm feeling a little cooped up around the winter time, and orange is a warm color that reminds me of warmth, of the sunshine, of gardening, of springtime walks. I'm just very excited about the spring. And that's when I notice that there is too much of a line around the border of the marking. I need to cut in with our warm browns around those clusters of lines that we've already added to really get rid of that hard edge. So I did a mix of our raw sienna, I added more raw sienna, orange, burnt sienna, and some of our black that's in there. And while I'm here with this color, I'm going to do some touch-ups, add another layer beneath the ears. In fact, on this right side, I'm going to add a little bit more of our light yellow brown. So this light yellow brown with a little bit of our orange, I'm going to add some to give more texture on the head as well as the eyes. I'm going to add some light yellow brown to my brush to just touch up and elongate one of the peach hairs on the horse's chin. And now that that bit of gray has dried beneath the right eye with my vermilion and sky blue, I'm going to cover that. Make sure there's no gray mixed in with that blue. And another area that needs another layer of coverage, using our warm browns with added black, is the hair. Now, like we talked about, if you decide to keep the fuzz around the ears, I'm just highlighting it with more white and yellow, brown, and orange, just to make this stand out a bit more over the blue-greens. Just be careful that you're outlining the hairs that we already painted in with fine lines. And out comes the green. I'm going to add some grass green to our paint palette because I decided to take those out. You'll see in a sec, I grab my size 5 Arteza ankle brush with a mix of the vermilion, sky blue, and grass green. I don't entirely get rid of all this orange yellow around the ears, just keeping that outline there, but painting over the fuzz. And pay close attention to contrast. You want to make sure it's either much lighter or much darker around the ears so that those ears just don't compete with the background value. And while we're here, let's go around and see if we can cover any little white specks of the exposed canvas. Also bring out any colors that we want to bring out. I'm gonna emphasize some of the lines and shapes and colors that I really like. And now back to the realism. You notice how we're going back and forth in our styles here. So now we're going to be a little bit more specific and technical, adding more fur over top the lines we've made and more with a light gray with the liner brush. And also making sure that we cut around the edge, getting rid of that hard edge and making it just this nice furry marking. But again, it's very important that we don't paint over the entire bottom layer, our gray purple. That's what's helping us create that dimension. I'm going to touch up the thickness of the nostrils, pulling in some violet into this very light gray. That I'm adding to the left nostril, just a small little fix up here. So if you painted around the ears like I did and touched up our background, by now it should be tacky, maybe dry for you. I'm gonna mix up more white into our yellow, brown, orange, and that's what I'll use to add a bright outline around the ears. And you know me, gotta touch up those highlights now on the head, on the right side and below that ear. I'll pull that down right above the bump above the right eye. Now, right along the jawline, I'm gonna give this more shape, bring it out and angle it a little bit more so the face doesn't come straight down. There's the slightest little angle on both sides. That light source is so strong behind this pony, so we need to add it on the left and right of the hair. And then I'll even darken up that color a little bit, add more orange into our yellow, brown, orange, add more orange into it and add a bit more of that texture. Those interesting dabs of color, I'll add that to the head and as well around the body. It's so easy at this point in the painting process to get obsessed with details that can just be left alone. As you can tell, it's a struggle for me, it really is, to let go. So here I am, take it from me, you might need fresh eyes, either a couple hours away from this painting or an entire day, or step back and just observe the full painting. Try to look at what you love about the piece instead of what you don't like. Like I love this vermilion mixed with white. I'm going to draw that out even more in the background. I also love that adorable highlighted bottom lip, and I think it needs more. I'm going to add just the tiniest amount of white to my brush. Just a little bit will go a long way, and I'll add that a broken up line on the top lip. And that's when I decide to thicken up the highlight on the bottom lip. And for that, we'll use fluorescent pink, white, and a bit of raw sienna. And I notice a few white specks and a little bit of a misshapen top nostril, inside nostril. So I'm going to mix up a dark gray and touch that up. Now it takes a few tries to get this value just right. I'm actually going for a medium value gray right here below the left nostril. And I think this just does it. It makes it so much better, adding subtle little dabs of light gray to the eyes. Pull some of it off if you need to, like I'm doing. on both eyes, and that's where the light is hitting at the bottom of both eyes. Do you remember those fun splashes of color that we added not too long ago? Well, let's do another round. Any color at all. I'm going with more of our orange, yellow, brown. Now the value I'm using is kind of right there between a light value and a medium value. And I'm adding it over top areas that there's already a medium value there, but also some dark. So you never know unless you just test it out. See if it fits, and if it doesn't, you can paint right over it. Now I'm gonna pull a what if. What if we add some of our blue-greens to the horse as well? And what if we added small dots instead of large dabs? I'm gonna try it with a mix of our vermilion, white, and sky blue. Why not? Let's add some to the background too while we're at it. And giving it some thought, nope, I'm not digging it, so I'm gonna change it to a purple. I try with a brown and then I move to a purple. So you can either use the brown first, then the purple like me, or dive straight in and add dabs of purple. And that's violet with some white. And that did it. I love how that's sort of close in proximity to the violets on the nostrils. And it just kind of brings those out more too. So the violet was it. I'm gonna go back to our warm brown, adding some black to it to get that real dark, and add our last layer to the hair on the forehead. All right, creatives, so that is the last step before we move on to the butterflies. So you're gonna need a clean paint palette for this. You're gonna need fresh, clean water as well, and let that pony dry for 5-10 minutes, or at least be tacky before adding the butterflies over top. All right, so I just thought that this portrait needed butterflies. It's one of my favorite things to add to my paintings. So I turned my paint palette around. I'm using the other side, and I'm gonna add orange, permanent red, cadmium yellow, white, and black. That's orange, permanent red, cadmium yellow, white, and black. I'm gonna pick up my palette knife and I'm gonna mix two colors, and we're just gonna be placing the shape of these butterflies first, using an orange yellow with cadmium yellow and orange. You wanna mix up a good amount. We're gonna put 2 butterflies in, but you can add more, you can add less. Now the next color we really won't be using too much of, but that's a vermilion. So the orange yellow we just mixed up, some of that in with permanent red and more orange. Again, we only use a little bit of it. But orange and yellows, those are colors that aren't that pigmented. They need quite a few layers to show up, especially over green and blue, which are more dominant colors. So you're gonna need a lot of layers for this orange to stand out for these monarch butterflies. So once again, I'm gonna use my size 1 Arteza round brush, and I recommend you watch me place these shapes first. They're gonna be slightly overlapping the left side of the pony's face. So just watch me and then you give it a try yourself. So I'm going to start with the front top wings first, and this butterfly is looking like it's flying in front of the horse's face, real close. And so I started with the top left wing, I'm working on the top right, and we're just placing the shapes of this, leaving the body, the center of the butterfly, out until we've completed the wings. Now the bottom wings are a little bit smaller and a bit more round. So I'm going to add those below both of those wings, again leaving that negative space for where we'll eventually place the body with a dark gray. And once you've applied the first layer, now it's like adding 3, 4, 5 or more layers just to have that bright orange stand out over top the blue. And you may even need to expand it, make these wings a bit bigger and shape them a little bit more. That's what I had to do because we want this to be slightly covering up the left side of the pony's face. And be patient with this. You may need to let the layer dry and then it'll really stand out for the layers you add over top. All right, so let's let that larger butterfly dry. We're gonna paint the next one in the upper right corner. Again, place this wherever you please. Same color, and we're just gonna create the side angle now for this smaller butterfly. So this kind of looks like a heart shape. This is the top and bottom wing, and then we're gonna see the edge of the opposite top wing sticking out. Now to get the perspective right, we're gonna raise up that top wing that's in the front a bit higher. You may have already noticed on the first butterfly we painted how much darker that first layer looks. Yep, it's going to require lots and lots of layers with our orange yellow, so give it some time to dry in between layers, and eventually you'll see that beautiful orange pop. All right, so with our 3/0 round brush, I'm going to mix up a dark gray with lots of black and a little bit of white, and we'll finally fill in the body of both butterflies. So this first butterfly, I'm going to add this tube-like structure and then a tiny little circle at the top for the head. I'll do the same thing but smaller to the lower left of the upper right butterfly. Switching brushes here to our size 1 Arteza round brush, and we're going to add more layers of orange, but instead of just the orange yellow, we're adding white to it, so it really stands out. But I just want to note that I'm actually not adding white to the full mixture, just in a separate pile, so we can go back to that medium value orange that we started with. Because my goal here is not to fill in the entire butterfly wing with just one value orange, but several to create some dimension. So on the outer part of both wings, where those wings are stretched out wide, that's where I want it lighter. But in towards the body on the wings, I'm going to add a little bit of our orange and even a little bit of our orange red, the vermilion. Just a little bit goes a long way. And layer after layer, we're going to build up that brightness and some of those reds that we blend in to these oranges. So I'll let those layers dry, move on to the smaller upper right butterfly. And on that bottom wing, I'll start adding a little bit of red, just a small bit on that bottom wing. Now, I also found that adding a separate pile of just yellow and white can also up that vibrancy. So that's cadmium yellow and white, and that's another layer that we'll add. Now here I go with another layer of our yellow and white. Don't be discouraged if this is taking a lot longer than you expected. This is a process, and just enjoy the vibrant, bright colors. All right, so once you're satisfied with those beautiful orange yellows with a bit of reds, we want that to dry for about 5-10 minutes, or at least until it's tacky, because what we're going to do next is go in with our dark gray and do the outlines around the wings. So right now I'm using my 2\0 spot brush, a great little brush for doing these very fine curving lines around the wings, and I mixed up more dark gray. You may just want to watch me first because these lines kind of vary in thickness. I'm going to start thin right at the top along the left of the wing, get a bit thicker on the outside of both wings. Now with the steady hand, I'm going to outline the back wing on this upper right butterfly without covering up all the inside orange. I'm also going to raise the body into that upper wing. I'm going to do the same thing on the larger butterfly, but if you watch me, I'm making certain areas much thicker, especially around the top of the wing, even around the bottom part of the wing. That outline is going to be much thicker than the thin lines and compartments that we outline within each wing. Like on this top wing, do you notice how I'm kind of making almost a rounded triangle at the top of this wing? I'll do the same thing on the left side. So I'm going to go move to the bottom wings. And if you notice, I actually cut in a little tiny bit with a bumpy texture on the outside of both bottom wings. But I don't put any lines up towards the body. That is going to stay bare with no black line. So I'm going to bring down the outline on the top of both top wings, getting it ready for adding those 4 little compartments that I'll call it within each wing. And I'm going to start at the top of the wing and then work on those side compartments down from there. All right, so get that steady hand out. We're going to work from the top of both top wings. And where we have the thick dark outline, it's going to start there and stretch all the way back to the top of the top wing towards the body. So we still have room to add in lines for the other 3 compartments. So going in the opposite direction, along this line that I'm making, that's where the other compartments will be aligned. So on the bottom wings, it's similar but quite different in that we're going to start in the center of both wings with our first compartment, and then going out around there, reaching all the way to that dark outline. That's where I'll add the other compartments. So on all the sides along those 2 gaps I just created, I'm going to create 6 compartments on both wings. And I know you might feel a little tense, a little nervous about messing up these lines. Well, guess what? If you do, all you simply do is let it dry and then touch it up and cut in over top it to thin out those lines or readjust them with more of our orange. Now, by now, after all those lines, you may really need to wash off your brush and get it really thin again, clean and damp, and then a small amount of paint to add those tiny, tiny little 2 antenna lines on the top of the head. So we're going to repeat those exact same steps, but less lines because we only have 2 wings really to paint in. But we're going to do it the same way, top wing first, then the bottom wing. This one actually felt a little more challenging for me. It was decent getting those 4 compartments in the top wing, but I actually left one out on the bottom wing because of how small it is. So just do your best, take your time. And sticking out from the top of the head, I'll add 2 very fine lines for the antenna, just like the other one. Now we're actually not done with our butterflies, but we're letting them dry so we can add the final step of adding those little sweet white dots over top the black outline. We'll let those dry. This is optional. I think that this horse needs more pink to pull out some of those greens. So we'll add fluorescent pink to our paint palette, add some white to it, and pull out the light pinks along the muzzle. So to accentuate those light pink highlights on the top of the nostrils, I go in with fluorescent pink and white, but I do move in towards the middle a little bit more and add more texture, but I also add more permanent red and white when I get to kind of the center of the nose. All right, so then wash off your brush, set it aside, and we're gonna grab our smallest spot brush, 3/0 spot brush once more. And all I'm simply gonna do with just a small amount of white paint on that brush so we get it super small is add little clusters of dots along the thickest, darkest gray along the butterfly wings. It's like the outer border that we started with our dark gray. Now I do end up adding just a tiny speck of black in there, so it's not just straight white, but we can get away with straight white here. Honestly, they need to be very light for these dots. Now, it's not only white dots that we see on butterfly wings, we actually have some thicker ovals. So I'm mixing up a light yellow with cadmium yellow and white to add those on the top wings. So I'm really trying my best to squeeze in rows of 2 dots, not just one, on the thick parts, especially on those bottom wings. Now hold on while I save this sweet little fly. I was afraid he'd fly into my water or my paint, but I managed to save the little guy. And the last and final step, aside from signing our work, is to add little tiny white dots on the body of both butterflies. All right, creatives, so we have reached the end of our pony painting. Continue working if you still are, but this is a great time to just pause and reflect a little on the process. What came up? How did you feel? What are some of the colors telling you? Maybe instead of butterflies, you decided to add sparrows, or maybe you added tulips or lilies. Again, this is observation. There is no right or wrong answer here, but why did you choose those? Now, take some time to think on that. There's also more journal reflections in the PDF link down below. I'm going to go ahead with some beautiful yellow, my favorite color, and add my initials. Feel free to do the same. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, let me know in the comments down below. And if you're already not, be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Have a blessed day. Bye.